But I was as determined as my heroine.
Yes, you were.
And the two occupations open to women then were
Nursing
nursing
and teaching.
teaching.
Nursing and teaching,
And
yeah.
since I didn't like blood, I thought teaching would be a better option.
Well, it turned out to be a good one for you. You know, there was a story you told me recently on a cruise. Pearl and I were on a writer's cruise out of Miami, or out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We had a really good time on that cruise. And you were telling a story, and I was there. You weren't actually telling it to me. But it was about when you went to college and came home and you were talking to your mother. And it was so precious that I'm going to ask you to repeat it. You know the one I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
My mother was an immigrant from the old country. She came in the early 1900s in a wave of immigration from Romania, a country that regarded Jews as stateless, and simply asked them to leave. Well, actually, they didn't. They simply did not allow them to work or find any way of subsistence, so they left in droves. And so she was a pretty simple woman. She could read, and she couldn't spell at all, but she could write a little bit. And I came home, and I'm from a large family of 4. I had 2 brothers and older brothers and a sister. And I said, Mom, how is it that Sid, my oldest brother—
Well, you'd been studying
Genetics,
and
biology. It wasn't
chromosomes
a
and
biology
genes.
course. And I said, you know, blue is a recessive gene. My father and my mother and 3 of us had blue eyes, but my oldest brother had brown eyes. I said, Mom, that's not possible. How is it Sid has brown eyes? And she said, well, and she always thought very seriously whenever I asked her such a question. She said, when I had children, you didn't need genes.
What does Sid have to say about this? Does Sid have any theories on this?
No, I don't think so. It never bothered him in the least.
I love that story. But you were involved in some women's organizations and things, you know, before it was cool.
Well, yes. I was head of the Women's Rights Organization in my teachers' union and in the National Union, and I belonged to a labor women's group where I was the chairperson of the Women's Rights Committee. And
what was the era? When was this happening?
Well, I think in the 80s, 90s.
Okay.
And I worked at that up until the time I retired from education in order to write full-time. But I'm very committed.
I was talking to somebody not very long ago, and he was talking about how during the 60s, the late 60s and the early 70s, how he'd considered himself a radical, and he'd done all these protests, and there was going to be a revolution, and there were all these things, and he said, we were going to change the world, and I don't think that we did. I said, of course you did. I said, you wanted to turn it completely around. I said, but you know, if you take a ship that's sailing across the ocean and it's got to go a couple of thousand miles, said you change the course of that ship 2 degrees, it's going to land in a whole different place. And I think that those protests and there's a lot of things we just take for granted now that were considered radical ideas 20 years ago, you know, and things that are really catching on now, like the concept of going green. Everybody's going green now. Before it was like, oh, only crazy tree huggers go green, but now it's like, no, companies are going green. Companies are saying we're not going to buy this product if it's not biodegradable. Just little things like that. But I say you just change it just a little bit, and the outcome can be huge.
Well,
in
there
the
are
long
2
run.
ways, it seems to me, that society changes. One is by awareness, going green being an example, and the other is by accident, perhaps you could say. My mother was a seamstress in the garment center in New York City, and she told me a story She was about 16 at the time and applied for a job sewing in a blouse shirtwaist factory. They called them shirtwaists in those days. And she was turned down. She was not hired. And 2 days later, the Triangle Dress fire killed 100-some-odd women because the owners of the factory locked all the doors but one, chained the doors so the women wouldn't steal shirtwaists. And they were jumping off fire escapes. It was one of the worst tragedies at the time.
Was it the place where she would have gone to
work?
It was the very factory where she would have gone to work.
I wouldn't, well, when she got angry, she would say, you know, if I had gotten that job, you wouldn't be here. So,
it's that same kind of logic, that mother logic that's known the world over.
She was just wonderful, right.
It's a friend of mine had a job interview in the World Trade Center the day of the day that on 9/11, and she overslept and missed her train, and she was on her way there when the subway stopped because the subways came to a halt and they didn't know why, and she was on her way there. And if her alarm clock had gone up, she had been out late the night before. If her alarm clock had gone up, if it was just a very bizarre thing.
That was the saddest time. I'm a New Yorker, and that was one of the saddest times in our city that I could ever remember. It was for weeks. There was almost a hush wherever you went, and men gave up their seats on the subway and on buses, unheard of usually.
Yeah, people started.
People became kinder,
looking around and paying attention.
Yes, but the whole affect of the city, it's a large city. People hurry by, pay no attention to one another. Not then.
They do and they don't. People used to talk about people who aren't from New York, and I'm not from New York. And there's this reputation that you go to New York and everybody's going to be very blasé and this and that and the other. But I also lived in Southern California, and I lived in New York, and they said, well, people are very friendly in Southern California, and they're not friendly in New York. I said, no, that's not true. I said, it's the way people express themselves is different. When you go up to a New Yorker and you say, excuse me, and they turn around and say, what do you want? What are you doing? They actually want to know. They just want you to tell them more quickly. But they actually are interested. And I was one of the first times I was in New York as an adult and on my own and not there to see a show, but there to actually visit friends and spend some time. I was at some kind of cheese. We were in line at some place that sells 5 zillion kinds of cheese. And it's the place you have to go to get cheese. So my friends insisted we were going to go down there and get in line. And I start telling some very animated anecdote in line. Now, if I had been doing the same thing in California, everyone would have pretended not to hear me. But in New York, you start telling a story, people turn around, and it's like they're assessing your story to see if it's any good. It's like the street.
Not only that, they're going to interrupt you and add their opinion.
Yeah, and it's like I suddenly realized that people are not ignoring me. They're turning around. It's like, okay, so you're telling a story in public. What do you have to say? They're paying attention. And then, like the people that stop on a street corner and get up on a box and sing or preach or whatever, they do this in Los Angeles. People walk by and pretend not to see them. They do this in New York. People stop to see if they're any good. It's like, hey, this guy's not bad, and they'll give him some money. It's like he's okay. They appreciate the entertainment value of the person doing it. I don't find New York to be unfriendly at all. It's busy. It's rushed. It's in a hurry. Please don't get in my way if I'm on my way somewhere. But I also find the people to be very generous with their town. Stop on a street corner and say, where's the best place around here to get whatever? And this one